Hey guys, welcome to episode 6 of making an online Pokemon game in GameMaker 2. I tried to find more about the dot length thing in GameMaker. I was not able to. So we'll just continue on. Just remember to use array length. It doesn't really matter that much. I'm not too stressed about it. I just got to remember because I mainly work in Java these days. So Java you would be able to do colors dot length. So I'll have to get used to that. Anyway, one thing I would like to say is to increase the size of the player, I'm just going to take this X and Y scale and we'll just double it for now. That'll make them a little bigger. I can test this out and that way we can see where we are. So now we are drawing this player. Can maybe even make him a little bigger if we wanted to, but yeah, so we are rendering a player out, and so every client can see themselves, but they cannot see each other. So if I connect a second player, this guy can't tell, and this guy can't see him. So they are unaware of each other's existence, even though they should be existing. So first, we'll make this 2.5 instead. And secondly, let's get that fixed now, which is not too difficult. I can come into the server. Actually, we'll go into network types because we're going to change this. We're no longer going to be receiving messages. That was just for testing. So we're going to create a new one called new player, or we could say player list. Yeah, no, new player, and I want to make this tabbed out a little more. So we'll have a new player, and we'll have the server send this to everybody else in the network. So what I can do now is come into here, and after all of this, we're sending to the player that connected their ID and their position. So now we need to go to every other player that's already in the world and tell them, hey, this new person just connected. This is their information. Before I do that though, I'm getting sick of this right here, this annoyingness in the network type data. So I'm going to create two new scripts here that just handle data. So I'll do Alt-C and we'll create a script called server data, or we'll call it server on data, and we'll create another one called client on data. And it's annoying that they're both far away, so I'm going to rename these to data client and data server. That way they are in the browser, they're just right next to each other. Maybe it's not the best. Maybe I could rename this to on data client and on data server. Again, most of programming is just figuring out what to name things. So yeah, there we go. On data client, on data server. And all this is going to be is a indirection of, if I go to the server, this network type data. So what do we need to pass in? We need to pass in the buffer. And is that it? I think that's all right now. So I will say on data server, and we need to pass in the header. Actually, no, we don't even need to do that. All we need is, well, nothing actually, now that I think about it, because it's all stored in the network anyway. So I'm going to Control X to cut that out, and then I will control, if you control middle mouse click a function, it'll open it to the side, which is very useful. I will tab this in, and everything here should be fine. I guess we do need to pass in the sockets because it's giving us an error, so or I could just do server.sockets there. That should have worked. Server.sockets. Why are you giving me an error? I'm not sure. Let me instead pass this in as a variable. So sockets, and in this we'll pass in the sockets. That should work just fine because now you're being passed in directly. Yep, that's fine. Okay, now under the client, I will do the same thing. So instead of all of this, I will say on data client. I don't need to pass in sockets now. So I'll mouse click or control middle mouse click to open up on the side. And I'm just going to select everything here, control X, and paste it here. So we have that entire switch statement in here. And again, tab it in. And we also need to get rid of this end message case because we don't have messages being received anymore. The same thing happens here. We don't need the switch case for the message. Anyway, okay, so that was a bit of cleanup done. Now under the server, if we come back to this, whenever we connect a player, again, we need to iterate over all of the players that are already connected and tell them, hey, we have a new connection here. Make sure you add him to your list. But we have no way of sending to all the players. We only have a way to send to the single player, to one single socket. So I'm going to go into the network and I'm going to create a new function. Instead of send, it'll be like send all. So if I come into my network, right now we have a function down here that just sends to a single socket. But instead I want to send all. And this will take in a sockets. And I'm going to also provide an exception. And I'm going to set it equal to no one. So what this is going to do is it's going to send to every socket in this array. And I wonder if you can set it to be a type, because right now if I hover over send all, it says sockets is any, but it should be an array of IDs. I don't know if that really matters, but we'll just leave it for now. Maybe I can figure that out later. But then we can provide an exception and say, hey, send to everyone except this single socket. And that'll be useful coming up here in a second. So what I'm going to do is for var I equals 0, I is less than, we'll do sockets dot array length sockets, and then I plus plus. So we're going to iterate over the sockets array, and I will move this up. So we're going to send the packet to sockets I, and we're going to use the buffer and buffer tell buffer. That's all fine. And in fact, I can remove all this and we can do another indirection. I'll just say send, which is this function right here, and we'll send it to sockets I. That's all I really need. That way I can change this function and it'll also change this one. So this is much easier, but we need to do a couple of conditions here. So we'll say if sockets I equals no one, continue. So we want to skip over any socket that doesn't actually exist. We also want to say if sockets I equals exception, we'll also continue. So we're going to skip over any empty sockets, and we're going to skip over this exception socket. And that should be everything we need. No errors as far as I can tell so far. Anyway, if we go to server now, we need to write this buffer and send it to the socket. So it's basically going to be the exact same as this. In fact, it is the exact same except for the fact that this start here needs to be changed. So I will say network.start, and we are sending an n, and we called it n new player. So we're sending a new player packet to everyone else. I will say network.write, and actually I can just take these 3 lines of code, these 3 writes, and just copy and paste them. They're the exact same. And then I'm going to do network.sendAll, and we're going to send it to all the sockets, every socket that exists. It'll obviously skip over any empty sockets, but we need to do an exception. We need to do an exception on this guy right here, because he's already receiving the player. He already receives it once, so we don't want to send it to him as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come into here and press comma, and I'm going to say sockets underscore ID. So we're going to send it to everybody, but we're going to skip over this one. And in fact, you know what? I'm going to change this. I'm going to say skip over the ID. So we're going to skip over an ID within the sockets instead of skipping over the socket itself. So I need to fix that in the code now. So if I go to network, instead of saying if sockets I equals exception, we'll need to change this to say if I equals exception. Don't ask why. To me, that makes a little more sense in my head, because we are identifying sockets by their ID, not by their socket itself. Anyway, that being said, that should send it to everybody, but we have no way of handling it when it does get received. So in the client now, if we come over here to this onData client function, we are handling when we receive our own ID, but we're not handling it when we receive anyone else. So we'll do a case on new player, and we can copy all of this. Everything's the exact same, except we don't need to set our ID to the ID. We just need to do this. And I don't like the fact that it's giving me warnings about this. I'm guessing the warnings are because they're already defined up here, but that should never be an issue. I assume that's what it's giving me an error about. Can I check if I go to feather messages? Yeah, already declared. I guess I could come up to here and do var ID x y, and I'll just predefine them up here, and then I can just remove all of these. Same here, just remove this var. And the code would not have been any different, just so you know. It would have been the exact same, but this way we don't get warnings, at least. So this should all be good. I can also get rid of this debug log because we don't need that. But yeah, so we are getting the ID, the X, and the Y. Oh, whoa, that sounded weird. And then we're making the player itself. But we're not setting our own ID to this. So we can run this, and we should be able to see more players. So let's rerun that. Ooh, malformed switch statement. Okay, so under this server, we need something. So we'll say case NID, and we'll just say break. Because we don't need anything in the server right now. The server's not receiving any data yet, but it will be. So I'm just going to add in something just so it doesn't say malformed. Anyway, so we run the server, and then we can come over and run the client. So there we go. Now we receive one player, and if I click it again, as you can see, the original player can now see exactly where the second one is. And if I run a third one, both of these guys see the blue person. But you're going to notice something. You'll notice that now the original character can't see where anyone else is. Like this blue guy, even though it's being broadcast to both the original players, he can't see where they are. So this is only one directional right now. So we need to now add in the place where the guy who just connected also receives everyone else's position. And there's a couple ways we could do this. One way would be to come into the server, and this might be the easier way, but I don't know if I really want to do this. I could just send this end new player to this guy for however many there are, and that would be a bad idea, I think, because we want to reduce how many times we have to call this send function. We don't want to repeatedly send out data. It's better to package it all into one big buffer. Well, overall it's usually better, but I guess it doesn't matter because the operating system will usually optimize it for us anyway. So it doesn't really matter too much if we just sent it. So what I could do is I could do a for I equals 0, I is less than, what's this called? Player controller dot players. And let me actually undo that. This is actually the network.max clients I++. And what I could do is I could copy this, paste it, And actually, this should be network dot send sockets ID. The ID is I. The position is going to be not P this time, but var. We'll do other P equals player controller dot players I. Okay, and then I can say other P, and here instead of P I'll do other P, and here I'll say if other P equals no one or other P equals P. Then we'll continue. Alright, so that was a lot. So what is this doing? So this is iterating over every single player that already exists, and it is first getting that player. It's making sure it actually exists, it's not empty, and then it's making sure that it is not the one we just created. And then it's going to essentially write out all the data for that player and send it to the guy who just connected. So send it to the character who just connected. Don't send it to everybody else. They already know about those players. Just send it to this one. And that's it. And because we're like essentially reusing this start, this should just work. And then if I come in here and I execute, let's see if this works. I was talking about it working first time, but watch it not. But no, there we go. Now if I execute all three, everybody can see everybody. And that just works. So why was I saying this is kind of a little unoptimal way to do this? Well, let's talk about that for a second. The reason is because let's say there's 20 players that are already connected. So I connect and there's already 20 players that exist in the world. I had to come through and I had to send 20 separate packets. I'm calling this send function 20 times, one for each player. That would be fine here because you kind of have to here because it's to 20 different people. But here I'm sending 20 packets all to the same person instead of sending it to just one. Instead of sending it to a bunch of people, we're sending 20 just to one single person. So you're doing 20 sends here on top of the 20 sends that happened here. So how can we fix this? Well, the best way probably would be to come into your network types, and we'll add in a new one. We'll call it n player list. And don't worry, the code we just wrote won't go to waste. We're still going to use that. It's just going to be reformatted a little different. And with how small of a game this might be, it might not be that big of a deal if you leave it, but we are going to keep it this way. So n player list. So if I come into the server now, instead of sending a new player, we're going to send a new player list. So a list of players, and it's going to be all in one big packet instead of 20 small packets. So I'm going to actually move this outside of the for loop, just like that. And then I am going to, how can I do this? So first I need to get how many players are actually connected. And then I need to write that in. So I need to first write out how many players there are and then write each player out individually. So how can I do that? I can come in here and I can do, I'm trying to think because this might not be a good thing either because we're going to do 2 for loops. But we'll just stick with it for now, I guess. That should be fine. Actually, you know what I can do? I'm going to come up into the server very top, and I'm going to say connected players equals 0. And yeah, I want to do that in the server, not the client. And then whenever I connect a player, at the very end, I'm going to say connected players increase. And here, whenever I disconnect a player, let me do this, connected players decremented. So if we connect somebody, we'll increase how many connected players we have. if somebody disconnects, we'll reduce it by 1. And I can see this having issues down the line, but it should be fine for now. So now in the player list, we are going to write that out. So network dot write, and we're going to do a buffer u16 because that's what we do for the IDs. So we'll just do that for this as well. And I'm going to write out how many connected players there are. So we're telling them, hey, we have this list of players that we're sending you, and this is how many players I'm going to send you. I don't need to subtract 1 here for this player because I don't add 1 until the very end. So this should just be fine. And then under here, when I say max clients, I'm going to iterate over and start writing this into the buffer. So this send network send can now go afterwards, after the for loop. And I can go other player equals this, and everything else should just be fine. I will say that there's a chance that this doesn't match our connected players count, so we might need to fix that. So that might be something to consider. A little bit of safety concerns there, but for now, I think I will leave it. The other thing you could do, which might even be better, is to just, instead of this, send a packet at the very end that's just equal to no one. In fact, yeah, that's better. So instead of this right at the very start, at the very end, we'll say network.write buffer u16 again, because that's what this is, and we'll say no one. So what's going to happen here is we're going to send a list of players, and every player will have an ID, an X and a Y position, but if ever we see an ID that's equal to no one, that means we have reached the end of the list. So the two ways to handle lists and sending lists is you can either at the very start tell the person who's receiving it, add in this is how many elements are in the array, or you could do something like this where you say just keep looking through until you see the no one key. And this is a little better because, like I said, we could have issues where this connected players variable doesn't exactly match how many we're writing. Hopefully all that makes sense. This should just work. If we come into the client now, or the I guess the on client data here, I can take this new player here and copy and paste that to be player list. So we're saying now if we receive the player list, what we're going to do is, instead of just reading one player like this, I'm going to read a list of players. So I'm going to do and you'll see why I'm doing a do while here in a second. And actually, no, I don't need to do that. We're going to do some fancy coding here. I'm going to do a while statement. And in this while statement, we're just going to keep doing this over and over, but I'm going to say, I'm going to do braces. I'm going to do ID equals this. So ID equals this. And we're going to do this while that does not equal no one. So this is a little fancy because we're saying we are setting ID, we're setting a variable within this while statement, and then immediately checking if it doesn't equal no one. And that means I can get rid of that line of code, and that should actually just work. Thinking about it, hopefully we didn't break anything. Probably did, of course. If I execute this, yep, ID is not set before reading it. So apparently this style of coding does not actually work in GameMaker, which is a shame. I love this type of coding, but apparently it doesn't work. Unless I did something stupid. It doesn't appear I did. Nope, yep, that should have worked. Alright, fine. Instead we're going to do while true. And then in here I will do this. I will say ID equals network.read buffer u16. And here I'll just say if ID equals no one, we are going to break. So what this is going to do is we're going to continuously forever iterate over and read this ID, but if the ID is no one, we're going to break out of this loop. Don't do continue. Continue will just continue on to the next iteration. Like I said, break will actually leave the loop itself. And then if it's not no one, we'll also read the X and Y and create it. So now hopefully it works. So I run the server, run the client, get another error, attempting to read outside the buffer. Buffer, read, buffer, type. So we did break something, which doesn't surprise me. It's probably on the server side of things. So if we look here, we are continuously writing this U16 and S32, and then eventually we write S6. Oh, you know what? It's probably because this isn't a signed variable. It should be signed technically. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this to be signed. Should it be signed? We never do signed anywhere else, which I probably should have. Yeah, I really should have made these IDs signed instead of unsigned. So for this player list for now, I will make these signed, because you can't send a because remember what I said, no one is the same as -4, and unsigned means you don't get that negative value. So we need to make these both signed in order for it to work, which means under the client, the on data client here, we'll also need to make these signed. So if I run this now, it should work. If I run this, execute the client, okay, now we're seeing the stuff work just like before. And if I run one more, we get that third player. If I run another, we'll get a fourth player. Run another, we'll get a fifth player, and they're all synced in the same position. So that should be fine. I know we had a little bit of bumps there, a little bit of bugs that we had to fix, but it should be fine now. If you want to go through, what you could do, which we should probably do quickly, we have 3 minutes about, go through these different switch statements and change these to signed. Hopefully don't break anything, but so under the on client data, I'm going to change this ID to signed and this one to signed. And then under the server, this on data server, no, sorry, just the server, do the same thing. Change this, wherever we set the ID, change it to be signed instead. So that happens right at the start and right at the end here. And that should be everything. Then just make sure we didn't break anything. Disconnect a few, and yep, it looks like they are all connecting. So next time, what do we need to do? We need to make it so right now you see 3 players. If I close one down, you still see 3 players. So next time we'll have to remove players from the list again. The server already recognizes that there's one less player, but we're not actually removing it from the connection. So we'll have to do that. And then after that, we can get to actual movement of the players. So yeah, sorry if this was a bit of a long-winded, confusing video. I don't know if I'm explaining things well enough for you guys, but hopefully this is working out. So until next time, guys, I'll see you later.